From the pages of John Bolton as a maniac, which John Bolton is a maniac, and I've said it on multiple occasions, that the person who you put in office is going to give some indication of the policy that's going to be espoused in that office. Even though Donald Trump is president, Donald Trump is hiring somebody who is a maniac to be in that office to, let's say, the power that flows through Trump now flows through this maniac in that office. I mean, after all, why would you put Bolton in that office if you're going to have a dovish foreign policy? You are not. You're putting somebody in that policy because you know that person is a maniac as they go into that office. I've said from the beginning of this channel that Donald Trump has been making moves to attack Iran. Whatever you want to say from the standpoint of any level of de-escalation in Syria, it was an up in the ante from the standpoint of his belligerence towards Iran. This started off with the pulling out of the Iran deal, but it hasn't stopped there. I mean, threats and all sorts of stuff. John Bolton, in a speech, said that he's going to be celebrating in Iran, I believe he said in 2019. So this is a year apparently that he's going to be celebrating in Tehran. Take a look at this. The question becomes, what does he have to do in order to celebrate in Tehran? And you're talking about chaos. Keep in mind, this is the guy that still thinks the Iraq War was a good idea, and this is the guy who's talking about the triangle of evil or whatever he's making up. He's coming up with this idea that there's an axis of evil again because the first time it went so well. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's laughable. So Fox News, and there are other ones, Bolton asked the Pentagon to develop military options for a strike against Iran, essentially a first strike, because it would be the United States making the first strike, because Iran it would be insane for them to do that. National Security Advisor asked the Pentagon last fall to develop military options for a strike against Iran following a mortar attack in Baghdad by a Tehran-backed militant group, and requested a request one former official said shocked some in a meeting. Think about this for a moment. A militant group that may have been supported by Iran. The United States supports dictators all throughout the world. I mean, just because a group does something doesn't necessarily mean that that is being pushed by Iran, even though they may get some level of support from Iran. I'm skeptical of this because when they were talking about the Houthis, they talk about them purely from the standpoint as if they're being somehow governed by Iran. Well, we don't necessarily know if that's true. We have no idea the amount of support that they get from Iran, if they get support at all. But that's the logic and that's the argument that they've used to come up with a basis to attack Iran. I just find this to be amazing. I mean, the reason that we're in the Middle East now is whispered, but not necessarily asserted, because if you assert it, that's somewhat against the law. But they whisper that we got to stay in that region in order to counteract Iran. That's what they said when Trump was talking about pulling out of Syria. It's like, but you say we were in Syria because we wanted to kill ISIS. What is this stuff now talking about Iran where you're changing the mission? The fact is the mission had never changed. They just lied about the reasoning for the mission. Right here. While it's unclear if the president knew about Bolton's plans, Bolton requests worried many in the Pentagon and the State Department concerned with the more hawkish approach towards Tehran. According to a former U.S. national security official, Pentagon participants in the meeting were shocked and dismayed at the request, concerned that such an escalation could lead to an all-out war with Iran. It probably would. Then Defense Secretary Jim Mattis joined the Secretary of State Pompeo and resisted the request. Just think, the guy named Mad Dog is the conservative member of the room. Like, that's the guy who's less hawkish, the one who they call Mad Dog. While the Pentagon did provide military options to the National Security Council, Mattis tried to manage expectations. Mattis, in this room, was the same participant. It definitely rattled people, one former senior U.S. administration official told the Wall Street Journal, which first reported on the request. People were shocked. It was mind-boggling how cavalier they were about hitting Iran. He's a lunatic, and he's a sadistic lunatic. When Jake Tapper is having a conversation and Jake Tapper is like, oh, Tulsi, you were talking to Bashar al-Assad. He's such a brutal, brutal man. This lunatic was in part responsible for the deaths of over 1 million people, let alone the complete disintegration of the Middle East. And being part of the disintegration of the Middle East, he still doubles down. He is still perfectly okay with upping the ante and doing it again. Another attack on a Middle Eastern country, another brazen and outright attack on a Middle Eastern country, this one being Iran. I find it amazing that this lunatic is not in jail, let alone still creeping around the offices of the president. I'm not going to keep this one long, but I said long ago that Trump administration was gearing up for an attack on Iran. And one action after the next gets across that it is likely, it is possible, and at the very least they were talking about it. And not even them, this lunatic. What they were talking about, the mortar attack targeted Baghdad's diplomatic quarter, which is home to United States Embassy. 3 mortars, however, landed in an open lot and nobody was harmed in the attack. Nobody was harmed in the attack. I'll end this. Keep in mind, this is the one who says he wants to celebrate in Iran. And if he is celebrating in Tehran, do you believe that Iraq went well? Do you believe that Libya went well? Do you believe that the campaigns in Afghanistan and Somalia and all of these countries where we've been bombing and killing and murdering civilians, do you believe that stuff has gone well? Do you believe the conflict in Syria where we've been giving weapons to terrorists in order to break up that nation and create the level of chaos that we had in the other day? Do you believe that's gone well? We've spent nearly $1 trillion. We're nearly $1 trillion a year on a military budget when all sorts of things in the United States are going to pot. They're telling you you can't get health care, you can't afford better roads, better bridges, solar power, you can't afford mass public transportation. Even though other countries have this stuff, you have to suffer from the standpoint of the services that you could receive that will make your life easier, that would lower your expenses, even if you're not in a situation where your wages will go up yet. It could make your life easier. But instead, you're spending nearly $1 trillion a year killing and murdering people around the globe and instigating yourself in things that that you shouldn't be instigating in at all. $1 trillion a year. And he's asking to up the ante with Pentagon plans in order to attack Iran. You're creating your monsters. This Swamp Thing is a lunatic. He should be in prison, let alone whispering in the ear of another president of the United States. Keep in mind, he's attacking the International Criminal Court. Now, why would he attack the International Criminal Court? Is it possible because he's a war criminal that is trying to evade the jurisdiction of the court? That's exactly why. John Bolton should be in prison right now. Any rational country that was looking to prosecute the crimes of Bush going into Iraq, the torture regime that followed, the bombings in the other countries that followed, would prosecute him, would hold him up on charges. But no, he is still haunting the presidency of the United States. And in this case, whispering in the ear of Donald Trump. I suspect Donald Trump put him in that office for that very specific reason. John Bolton is a lunatic. I'll end this here. I can't keep this one. I can't keep this one long. So, if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the Patreon. Thanks all. Please put this lunatic in prison.